Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what is making the headlines with the barrister and former government minister, Anna Soubry, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne, with us from now until just before midnight. So welcome to both of you. As ever, let's kick off with the front pages, starting with the Metro, their front page, focusing on the Prime Minister ordering a probe into former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs with the headline, Rish Dish the Dirt. That story also making the front of the FT, the headline reading, Zahawi fights for his political life over tax scandal as Sunak orders an ethics review. Zahawi faces the sack as the PM demands answers. That's the front, as you can see, of the Eye. The Star also leads with that story, writing, you don't need a lettuce to see how this one ends, in reference to their live-streamed lettuce, which outlasted Liz Truss's term as Prime Minister. It was an iceberg though, wasn't it? Alternatively, the Express leads with the story of triple murderer tricking his way into Britain by posing as a child asylum seeker. That story also on the front page of the Telegraph. Killer posed as a child to claim asylum and murder again in the UK. More papers coming in as we speak. We'll get to them as we can. Just a quick reminder, though, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's go straight to Anna Soubry and Sebastian Payne. Sebastian, why don't you kick us off? Zahawi fights for his political life, makes the front page of a number of newspapers, and Sunak ordering an ethics review. And all of this really, I suppose, dated from Boris Johnson's time, when he was scrambling around, losing ministers, trying to find a chancellor for himself. Remind us, if you can.
Well, the story actually goes back a little bit further than that. It's Nadhim Zahawi, who is Conservative Party chairman and was very briefly Chancellor at the very end of the dying days of Boris Johnson's government. He was founder of YouGov, which is the very successful big polling company. There's been a lot of backwards and forwards about when YouGov was sold and what happened to Mr. Zahawi's share price. And there was a lot of discussion about when he was made Chancellor, about whether he was under investigation by HMRC. And we've learned over the past week that he obviously was under investigation and that he has paid a retrospective sum in terms of tax with regards to the shares of YouGov. But then there's also been reports of that he was fined by HMRC because of what he paid in the tax when YouGov shares were sold there. So really where we've got to with this is that Mr. Zahawi has struggled with the past couple of days in terms of reports, but there's now been a full investigation into what's going on by the PM's independent advisor on ministerial interests. And those viewers with a longer memory will remember Lord Christopher Geit, who was the former ministerial interest advisor, investigated Boris Johnson under Partygate, Wallpapergate, all the gates you could possibly imagine. His replacement is Sir Laurie Magnus, who's a former banker, and this is his first major investigation. And throughout this, we should say, Mr. Zahawi said that there was no intentional wrongdoing and that what happened was a mistake and the money has been paid and he has apologised for that error. But politically, it's obviously a bit of a tricky position for Rishi Sunak because this story's been building for a couple of days now, and I think it's sort of distracting from what he wants to do with the government, that he started the new year with this 5-point plan about how to refresh the economy, refresh the party, focus on the core issues the government wants to make progress on, which is obviously inflation, interest rates, all that sort of thing. But ultimately, this is the kind of sort of this element of sleaze. And Onward, we've done research into problems with the perception of the Conservative Party's brand. And that sense of sleaze, of things not being above the board, is one of the biggest risks for the party. So I'm sure Mr. Sunak will be hoping this will go away rather soon. But by starting the investigation to Mr. Zahawi, it means basically he won't be able to say any more about it. And when it comes to that crucial PMQs on Wednesday, all he'll be saying is, as we were once waiting for Sue Gray, we're now waiting for Laurie Magnus.
Absolutely, yes. It feels identical, doesn't it, in some respects? But it does exacerbate that impression, does it not, of the wealth of some Tory members compared to struggling workers at the moment who can't pay their fuel bills. The Eye, Anna, says that they've been told Sunak would not have backed Zahawi publicly if he had known the full story. Despite the Prime Minister questioning his conduct, Zahawi believes he will keep his job. As allies say, Number 10 knows how effective he is at CCHQ and how likely he is to be cleared. So should he be suspended while an investigation is underway, do you think? Because he's ineffective in his role at the moment, is he not, while this cloud hangs over him?
Look, I'm just thinking of all those fans that were singing about Frank Lampard sacked in the morning. You're going to get sacked in the morning. And that is what comes out to me about the Zahawi affair, is that you just get this feeling that you can't see how he's now going to survive, as Sebastian says, through to PMQs. And if it's right that Sunak didn't know all the details, and I may have got this wrong, and I'm not sure, did he not know all the details when he spoke at PMQs last week, or was it when he actually appointed him? In any event, if Sunak thinks that Zahawi has not been upfront with him, then he won't hesitate to get rid of him. But at the moment, you don't feel there's a great crying out from the Conservative backbenchers to sack Nadhim Zahawi. A lot of that will be because he's actually hugely personable and he's liked. It won't matter. There's a real, as Sebastian says, real reputational damage here, that real strong sniff of sleaze. And as you say, Anna, there's also the fact that people say £5 million, repaid and in a fine. God, what world do these people live in? It's not the world that I'm living in the economic crisis that the country's in.
Yes, Nadhim Zahawi seemed to have done very well in his role as vaccines minister, which was seen at the time as utterly crucial in getting the UK, free from lockdown and free from disease, to be fair, at that point, wasn't it, Sebastian?
Yeah. Yes.
And I suppose the question is, when was this settled? Was it settled when he, in a rush, as I hinted, became Chancellor? And therefore, as far as Rishi Sunak was concerned, the matters had been dealt with when he was asked about it in PMQs last week. Anyway, all of this will come out in this inquiry. We wait for that. So, what happens in the interim then, in terms of reputational damage to Zahawi and to Sunak, Sebastian?
Well, just to echo what Anna said, I think Nadhim Zahawi, because, I think Ian Duncan Smith, the former Tory party leader, was on the broadcast rounds this weekend, and he said, that there was some more questions to be answered. And clearly the Prime Minister has come to that same conclusion. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked Sir Laurie Magnus to investigate Nadhim Zahawi if he felt everything was entirely clear. So there are some matters that need to be cleared up. And I think the chief one is all about the timeline of when this happened, because there's been quite a lot of conflicting reports and statements about what happened. But I think Anna is also right that Nadhim Zahawi is well liked among Tory MPs, that he became the MP for Stratford-on-Avon in 2010, and he didn't do that well in the David Cameron government, but then after Brexit he was a long-term supporter of Boris Johnson and backed Brexit. And then his first big role, as you said, was very much the vaccines minister, and I think we'll remember from those darkest days of the pandemic when he came in to really push people to get jabs and was seen in Whitehall as being very successful in terms of getting the vaccines rolled out. So I think that's why he's risen very quickly. And then he had that role very briefly as Chancellor at the end of Boris Johnson's time. And then he did briefly run for the Tory party leadership, but I didn't really get very far on that basis. And then obviously under Liz Truss, he was he's been on a bit of a merry-go-round of ministerial roles for the moment. But I think the government is clearly quite loath to lose him, because if the story had got to this stage, when you're a Prime Minister, you have a decision. Do you just decide to spend the political capital and save him, or do you cut him loose? Now, that was the decision Rishi Sunak faced today, and there was an editorial on Conservative Home, which is a popular grassroots website, and this is what they said, that Rishi Sunak needs to decide, is he going to back or sack Nadhim Zahawi? Because allowing this to drift on is the worst of all worlds. And essentially, they are backing him, because if they were going to sack him, they would have done that. He's made it clear he thinks he's done nothing wrong, and he's not going to resign. So what happens now, to your original question? The answer is we wait for Laurie Magnus, because he's not. The Prime Minister will now say on every question he's asked about Nadhim Zahawi, I want full clarity, there's now an investigation. And whenever Mr. Zahawi or another government minister is asked, they will say the same thing, it's under investigation. So for the moment, really nothing more is going to happen. But the crucial thing, of course, with all this is, does the media report more? Are there more stories? And if that builds up a head of steam, then events could overtake that investigation. But I imagine Mr. Magnus will be under much pressure to get this done pretty soon, so there's clarity either way.
OK, I just wanted to ask Anna, as we look at the Daily Star, you don't need a Daily Star lettuce to see how this one ends. We save ourselves 60p on a leafy veg, is how they put it. Anna, how much does this have? Oh, Anna's not there. Apologies, she's gone. OK, fine. I'm gonna.
I'm still
she's
here.
back.
Talk about
Anna, are you back? No, she's not. She's not back. Anyway, I'm going to move on, if you don't mind. I'm going to save that question for Anna as an MP. But I want to move on to the Daily Telegraph. China. Threats or fears about China. It can exploit laptops, cars and even fridges to spy on the UK. Tell us more about this, Sebastian.
So this speaks to a growing concern amongst ministers in the state that actually the UK has gone too far in terms of allowing China's access to core bits of national infrastructure, in terms of technology and in terms of intellectual property within the UK. And viewers will know that we've had lots of ups and downs in terms of our relationship with China. Under David Cameron and George Osborne, we had the so-called golden era when we were very much trying to allow China to come in, invest in the UK. And the result of that now, as China has become more authoritarian, is they do own and have access to sort of big parts of crucial parts of the UK economy. And this story on the Telegraph is actually saying in some respects it's too late in terms of what they own, the amount of technology that's on the use across the economy. And, you know, ministers made that big decision about 18 months ago with regards to Huawei, which is the Chinese tech telecoms company, and allowing them to have a bigger role in the UK's 5G network. At first, they were allowed a limited role, then that was U-turned, and then they were now allowed no role at all. And that has stalled the UK's 5G rollout and added a lot of extra expense. So there's a lot of push and pull here. But I think the significance of this Telegraph story is ministers want to say, it's okay, we've got control of this, we're keeping China away from the critical stuff. This story, in fact, is kind of saying the opposite and saying it's too late, we've already passed that Rubicon, and now China really has a problematic role in terms of our national security.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Anna, you've joined us. I'm going to try and see if you can pick up on that. The idea that microchips have been weaponised. It's like Trojan horse technology, which poses a wide-ranging threat to the UK. And this idea, are we just a bit asleep on the job in terms of technology?
Well, you might be making a very good point on that latter part, but I suspect that it's these sorts of things could always have been predicted. Look, the situation with China has always been difficult because it goes right to the heart of, if you like, modern foreign policy, whereby you say, look, if you reach out with trade, if you make connections, then that is the way to get that sort of, if you like, regime change without having to go to war or into conflict. And that if you, as I say, engage, then a people will want more democracy, a regime will change, it will open up, it will give its people democracy, and it will be the end of the tyranny that's existed in China for actually many centuries. And, you know, there's a good, that was the theory, if you like, behind it all. And I'd be the first to admit that actually there's been no real, I don't think there's any been real change in China at all. There have been crumbs of comfort. So when people said that they were absolutely fed up with the COVID restrictions, you'll remember a few weeks ago, then the Chinese government were almost forced to change. But that's not the same as really opening up and being a free, open, democratic society. It is a totalitarian and it is a brutal regime. And I would, as I say, be the first to say that what we were trying to achieve, and it had actually been going on for decades before. Ted Heath was one of the first people to reach out to China and try to bring it into a more, well, frankly, more civilized and democratic way of behaving. And conducting its affairs, and we've not been successful.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Joining me once again, Anna Soubry and Sebastian Payne. Welcome back to both of you. Anna, Daily Mail, an article by Boris Johnson, What the Hell is the West Waiting For?, where he describes going to butcher and standing over the graves of some of the 416 inhabitants of this town, 9 of them children, who, he says, were shot by the Russians in an attempt to terrify the rest. Tell us more.
Well, first of all, what you can't argue with is what is happening in Ukraine and the need of the West to up its game. I completely agree with all of that. I think there is the most appalling tragedy still being played out by the Russians, their illegal invasion, their just appalling tactics deliberately targeting wholly innocent civilians, including, of course, children. And it's just appalling, and we're not still doing enough. And we know our country's done a great deal, but collectively we've got to do a lot more. We can talk about Germany and tanks and so on and so forth. But the other question, I think, is this: what the hell is Boris Johnson doing? We know he went there yesterday, acting as if he was still our Prime Minister. And I think he's on manoeuvres. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Because in May, I think that the Conservatives will do very badly in the local elections. And I think he is absolutely rolling the pitch after those huge election defeats in May to say, look, I'm the man. I'm the man who can save the Conservatives from absolute obliteration come the next general election. And I'm sorry to be cynical, and it shouldn't be like this, for goodness sakes, because it is appalling what's happening in Ukraine. But I think this is blatant manoeuvring by Boris Johnson. But what he actually says is absolutely spot on.
Yes, manoeuvring for what, though? I mean, to be PM again, or to be envoy to Ukraine for the British government, or that he's got time on his hands to do this now and he, sees it as very important. Anna shaking her head. Sebastian, your view?
Well, let me be a little less cynical just for a moment there, even though I think I can appreciate, a lot of people appreciate where Anna is coming from here. So earlier in his career, Boris Johnson actually wanted to be a war reporter. That after he was Brussels correspondent for the Daily Telegraph in the late 80s and the early 1990s, he asked Sir Max Hastings, who was the editor of the Daily Telegraph, could he go off and be a war correspondent? And I think it would have been Serbia and Kosovo at that time. And Max Hastings said, no, you're completely ill-suited to do this. You should actually come back and be our star political columnist. And for a lot of people, that would be, oh, well, wonderful. That's a brilliant job. But actually, Boris always likes to be out there and be a man of action. He was quite disappointed. And what I find fascinating about this article is an insight into a career that never happened for Boris Johnson, which was to be a war correspondent. If you read the passion that he's written this article in, it really is extraordinary. And the graphic detail takes you right into those horrific scenes that he describes in the suburbs of Kyiv there. So there's no doubt about it that, he is a very, very good writer, and he's very passionate in what he's saying. I mean, there is no getting away from the optics of this. The biggest selling country of the paper has put its front page with a big piece by Boris Johnson. It doesn't take a smart political analyst to tell you what Anna was getting at. This is very helpful for him politically. Is he on manoeuvres? I mean, I'm still a little bit more sceptical than some people on this, just because I think, how do you become leader of the Conservative Party? It's through the MPs. And I don't get a big sense that a lot of MPs want him back at the moment.
Okay.
That may change after May's elections, to Anna's point. But for now, I think they just want to calm things down. But it's clear that
Sebastian.
Boris Johnson's most passionate supporters, they certainly want him back, and they'll be loving this front page.